Hey everyone, welcome to Conversation Piece with Patrick Armstrong. I am the titular Patrick, and this is a show where we talk about the missing pieces of the conversations we're already having. Shout out to all our returning listeners, and a high five and hello to everyone joining us for the very first time. Thank you so much. For too long, adoptees have not been the authors of our own stories. That's changing, and this month we're joining Discourse to be part of that change. Together with BIPOC Adoptees, we are reclaiming our narratives by honing in on specific areas of the BIPOC adoptee experience that need to be amplified right now. This is a brave space for adoptees to share with the world what we know is needed both inside and outside of our community. These are the BIPOC Adoptee Conversations. My guest today is a transracial adoptee, actor, writer, poet, advocate, and activist for the rights of British East and Southeast Asians, and a founding member of Beats.org, one of the 106 Hong Kong foundlings brought over to the UK during the 50s and 60s. She is also an advocate for the voices, lived experiences, and expertise of transracial adoptees. It is my honor and privilege to welcome Lucy Sheen to the show. Hey, Lucy, thank you for joining me.
Hi.
I really appreciate, again, as I said before we hopped on here, you giving me the privilege of your time, your story, and again, your expertise and the work that you've done and what you feel like is missing from this conversation around the BIPOC adoptee experience. And for folks who may not know who you are and who are listening to the show right now, do you mind sharing just a little bit more about yourself?
Not at all. I'm, as you said, an actor and a writer, and also now a filmmaker. I came quite late into the whole world of, I suppose, what you would call adoption politics, quite late on in life. And that just launched me into rethinking about my sort of position in British society, not only as being female, but also being a person of colour and also an adoptee, which is kind of sort of strikes me as a double whammy. So, and it was from that it basically influences a lot of the creative work that I'm involved with and interested in, particularly in terms of narratives and where and who gets the right or not to actually tell those narratives. I did do for a short while a bit of, I suppose you'd call training work for prospective transracial adoptees. And I stopped because it seemed that everything was up the wrong way. I was being brought in at a stage where sort of the contracts have been signed, and I was telling these people who I'm sure had the best possible motives at heart, asking them to think about, do you know the social and cultural and racial politics of the area that you're bringing this child into? And a look of complete and utter fear and, sort of, if you've never actually had to think about where you are placed in society, then it must come as a shock when you get somebody that looks like me coming in and saying, hey, have you thought about this?
Right.
What plans have you in place to basically tutor your child and yourselves in the culture from which they come from so that you can speak to them in their native language and do that for as long as you deem necessary for the child. So all of these things, for me, it's a no-brainer. These should all be done before you even get to the stage of looking at paperwork.
So true.
And I think that's where I come from the advocacy and activist side. And also, sort of I'm sure it's the same across the pond, but this idea of experts, particularly when it comes to matters of race and culture, always seem to me to be not predominantly academics who tend to be male, white, and middle class. And over here, they're usually Oxbridge educated. And it's like, fine, that's fine. But what people need to hear, particularly when you're talking about the systems that we cling on to when it comes to childcare and adoption, etc., they stem from the 17th century, and they haven't really changed. That mentality hasn't really changed. So it's not child-centric. It is about the people who are going to look after those children. And not saying that that's not important, but the very nature of looking after the child, putting a child into care, should be about the child, the needs and the wants of the child, not the aspirations and the wants and the likes or dislikes of the prospective parents. So I basically gave up that training work because for me it was completely not enough and at the wrong time and far too late,
Totally. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I appreciate it because I think that's going to be really helpful context for this conversation we're about to have. And before we get into that, I probably should have said this at the top, but you are calling in from the UK. So
Yes.
You're coming in and bringing a little bit of a different experience and perspective to this conversation, particularly for this series. And also mentioned that you were one of the 106 Hong Kong foundlings who came to the UK during the 50s and 60s. I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about that specifically, especially for folks who may not know about that specific group.
That came about, that particular program, which was imaginatively called the Hong Kong Project, was to do with actually trying to find homes for the ever-growing number of foundlings in Hong Kong. And that was off the back of migration post Second World War, and then obviously the revolution in mainland China. So, and several kind of like natural disaster events in Hong Kong during sort of the late 40s and 50s. So the indigenous orphanages were literally bursting at the seams. And the program initially, it was thought that they were going to adopt these children, mainly 99.9% of them being girls, to Asian American families. However, it was discovered that the preference for a lot of those families was male children, of which we were not. So Hong Kong being a British colony, it was then decided that they would try and place as many children as they could with British families, which, is what it was. We were sort of catalogued, and our photos were disseminated to various, I think, religious Christian societies and churches to find if there were people who wanted to adopt any of these Hong Kong foundlings. And we were scattered to the four winds. So you're talking about the 50s and 60s. So in terms of people of differing colours, I think probably was the only sort of colour at that time that was present and had sort of established themselves in terms of coming over from Jamaica and the islands to fill in the positions that none of the indigenous people wanted to work in, i.e. bus conductors and all the rest of that, and train drivers. So there were quite a few transports where we were literally given to either the hostesses, or hostesses were finding passengers who would literally take a baby on arms and escort it back to London Airport, which is now known as Heathrow. And we were literally picked up as you would a parcel from a post office, and went off with our new families. And at the time, sort of, I think, apart from the centres like Manchester, Liverpool, Swansea, Newcastle, you didn't really see that many East Asian, Southeast Asian faces in the general populace. So I grew up in a place where it was pretty well much only me and an Indian restaurant. was it. So, and times have changed. And it was very much during that era where was kind of, sort of clean break. So nothing was alluded to. In my case, I can't speak for the other Hong Kong adoptees, that, sort of you start from scratch. I can laugh at this now, but, sort of at what point did they not realize that I wouldn't notice that I didn't actually look like my parents or anybody else around?
Sure.
So, the Chinese elephant in the room, as it were. So, which is quite funny. Which is quite funny now, but at the time, obviously, it's not. And the view towards race, particularly in the UK, towards sort of China and anybody from East Asia, has always been a very peculiar sort of attitude, and one that is predominantly negative. So that is sort of where I come from. 2008, I was contacted by an organization that was wanting to do research on these 106 adoptees. And I said, yes, I would sort of join in that. And I think I met 98 out of the 106
Oh, wow.
Hong Kong adoptees, which was a very weird experience. Because,
I was going to ask, what was that like?
Well, it was very odd in that it's the first time I have seen so many East Asian faces, but with varying different UK regional accents.
Sure.
Which you just don't. I mean, I know it exists, but you just don't. And culturally, in this country, you just don't see that. You just don't. It's like baby pigeons. We know that they exist, but you never see them.
Sure.
So that was really odd, and nice in some senses. But I also found it quite sad in that obviously we all came into the country pre-internet, pre-mobile phones and all the rest of that. So I think we probably all knew that there were other people like us that existed, but how would you kind of connect with those people? Where would you go to kind of actually find that? So that was kind of like quite sad that we had sort of missed out on actually being able to find each other. But it was an enjoyable but very strange sort of a feeling to be in this room with so many other people that had this one thing in common. But then on the other side of that, which people of colour and adoptees get the same thing, is that you must know every other single person that looks like you. If you're Korean or if you're Hong Kong, of course you must well know, sort of, and that is also something that you're kind of like sort of burdened with, as it were, sort of. And as one of the adoptees said to me, she probably has more in common with people who cycle because that's her passion than she does with some of the other, sort of adoptees or transracial adoptees.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like a burden is an apt way to describe it because I've had similar situations where it feels like I'm supposed to know all these people and or understand and know their experience, when at the end of the day, like, you have to be able to sit down and have a conversation, multiple conversations, before you can really get to that connection. And while in the adoptee community, it is like you meet another adoptee or multiple adoptees and you can feel a lot of resonance, it isn't just like, it doesn't always just click in that way. You got to be able to build community. It's not that you can find community, but it's something different to be able to build that.
Yeah.
Together with other folks. Are you still in touch with any of the adoptees that you met?
One or two. I mean, I think it's a very odd thing for me. Obviously, one's personal experiences kind of shape how you sort of navigate the world of adoption, and I find it particularly tricky. And I did come across quite a few that I termed born-again adoptees, which is, adoption is the greatest thing since sliced bread. They are very much forever family, the fairy tale ending. It's transformative, which, don't get me wrong, it should be. But my experience and having met other adoptees who are willing to speak out, and the majority of them, it is not the positive experience that the PR and sort of the advertising would have us believe.
Right.
And I'm not against adoption or transracial adoption, but neither am I for it, because I think there are so many things that we as societies, particularly in the West, need to re-look at and to actually have some quite painful conversations around that whole sort of, and it is, unfortunately, I think, an industry
100%.
of sort of, I think, legalized trafficking of children, babies, and young adults sometimes. And no one likes to be told that they're doing it wrong, or what they've done is in the past is less than admirable. But I think we are in a time when we should be talking about those things, because we know a lot more, and therefore now we know what we know, we should be putting that into action. And I don't see a lot of that happening in the UK or indeed in the States, from what I'm aware of.
I mean, I totally agree. I think we need to be moving towards accountability. And I think it's really difficult for people to do that, particularly when it comes to adoption. Because like you said, it is, for all intents and purposes, legalized trafficking. When you are paying, when you can literally put a price tag on a person, that is commodification to any degree, in any definition, as you want to put it. And that's hard for people to understand because, like you said, the propaganda, the advertisements, the way that we've always talked about it, this dominant narrative that overshadows all of this is that it's a happily ever after, that everybody ends up fine. And the outliers are folks who have a negative experience or something antithetical to what we've always heard is adoption. And that's a problem. We have to have those conversations. One of the reasons we're having a conversation right now, and why it's important for folks not only within our community, but especially outside of our community to be listening, because they have to understand and they have to hear from us. Like you said, who are the experts that are talking about this? Like those older white men who have went to university, who have done a lot of work, that is one thing, but they don't actually have or carry, most of them don't have or carry that lived experience of what it means to be adopted, particularly transracially, particularly across countries. And we have to be able to share our experiences with that and be validated and taken seriously when we're talking about those things.
I mean, I think there are so many things that are encompassed, particularly in transracial adoption, to do with decolonization of the environment. And, then you have that nasty, for better word, race, which we have to kind of embrace. And whether it's a human construct or not, we have bought into that hook, line and sinker, and we put so much store on that. So if we put so much store on that, then we have to have those hard conversations about what that means, what it does, what are the tools that you as parents, you need to have in order to be able to support that child to grow up, to be able to cope with anything that life throws at it. We don't get a manual when you have a child, however you get that child, saying that you do A, B, and C. You learn by your mistakes or from your parents, from your grandparents, if you're lucky enough to have those, and also by what goes on around in your environment. So all of these things need to be really looked at in terms of the transracial adoptee and what happens to that child and how that child grows up and how important it is for the child to have that safety of the markers that those who grow up in natural families, they don't have to fight for that. They don't have to think about, where do I sit on the social chain and the cultural chain? They can switch on the telly and they see somebody that looks like them and talks like them and, does the normal things. Whereas yourself and I, we will switch on the television and more often than not, we will see things that are stereotypes and racial tropes that are not us,
100%.
So that's really important that we are flipping the script. We are reframing that narrative so that the emphasis is on the child and it is child-centric. And those things of the life that child had, it doesn't matter whether it's a month or 6 years, that is still an integral part of that child. And until that child comes into its majority, those are the things that need to be there for them to be able to pull upon. And if when they come 18, 21, they don't want to be involved with that, then that's a decision they make as an adult, having been fully informed throughout their formative years.
Exactly. And that's a piece of advice that I try to give prospective adoptive parents or even adoptive parents whenever they ask. Like, a question that I get a lot is, how do I make sure that the adoptee in my life stays connected to their culture? And I'm like, well, one, you can't force anybody to connect to it, but you have to be able to provide them the opportunities to engage with it. And you have to actively be engaging with it yourself, and not from an appropriative manner, but from a manner of appreciation. And I think that distinction is really important, because people think, oh, I throw on like a hanbok or something from Korean culture, and it's like, okay, now it's like, I'm doing it now. Don't you want to do it too? And
it's what I call the sort of the dragon and lantern kind of like mentality over here. You take them to a couple of dance classes where they can wave a fan about and listen to kind of like cod Chinese music, and that's fine. That's their culture. And it's not, and it takes an awful lot of work if you have no sort of background in that. So it's not just about the child. It's about you as a parent.
Yes.
And that's your investment. That's your commitment. That's your unconditional support and love for that child, is actually being able to have at least some of the answers, or being able to show that child where to go if they want to take things further. But you have to do the groundwork first. You can't expect other people to do that. And in this day and age, there is no excuse, really.
Right. And that's the thing. And like, especially for older adoptees or adoptees who came about, like in the 50s, 60s, 70s, I'll even go up to the 90s when I was adopted. That was the rhetoric. And this is why the industry is so harmful to adoptees specifically, and by extension, adoptive parents, because they're told assimilation is the key to having a successful adoptive family, which in reality, and now that we have a lot of academia and scholarship from adoptees themselves who have done this work, it's clear that that is not the case. And that we, you said, need to flip the script, reframe this narrative. So that way, in the future, as adoptions continue to happen, because they are going to continue to happen in different ways, shapes, and forms, they can be more informed. And like you said, there is no excuse now for a prospective adoptive parent to not be doing that work. And if they are unwilling to do that work, then they shouldn't be adopting. They shouldn't be adopting.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a tough gig to be a parent at the best of times, but to take on a child of difference, it is an entirely different thing, and I think it's underplayed, I think, all the time in terms of, it's being ingenuous in some senses. It's a quick fix. You can choose the baby or the child that you want.
Right.
And it's easier and quicker to do it if you go to certain countries.
Right.
Because you can do that. You can fill in the forms and it's much easier and it won't take as long. And that is, it is like going to a store and then saying, I want that child in that color, with that. Thank you very much. I'll pay that, and off I go. And that's my family.
It's literally, they literally had catalogs, like a J.C. Penney's or something, and like you just flip through and you're like, and then that was when proxy adoptions were the norm. and where you didn't have to go to the country of origin and
Yeah.
learn, at least immerse yourself in the culture for even a week, 2 weeks, whatever it is. You could just, like you said, it's a quick fix. So just like pick the person out. Here's my check. And all right, off we go to our new family and our new life.
But then that's sort of, it's framed within that Eurocentric Western ideal, isn't it? Of
Yes.
West is best and what is good and superior. I mean, there is still the attitude which drives me nuts of this kind of like pseudo-Christian, we are saving the child.
Yes.
And my answer to that is, from what?
Right.
If you want to save the child, then you invest in the country so that they have the systems and the wherewithal to look after their orphaned or children that need to be cared for because the natural parents, for whatever reason, can't. So if you're that invested in wanting to help and save children, then invest in the countries so that they can do it themselves.
Exactly.
This is not a pick and mix. We are not objects. We are human beings. And so adoption is for life. It's, it's not something that you can just decide to kind of like forget about. Although, sort of some of the horrendous cases that, you hear of adoptees being returned because they're found to be too problematic, or there were problems, or they have health problems which weren't disclosed when they adopted them, and they've just put them on flights and sent them back, which is horrific.
It really is. And that's something I've been talking about a lot lately or over the past couple of years, actually, is that the reason that the narrative is what it is because the question that we're supposed to be asking ourselves is, why is anyone ever in a position to have to give up their child in the first place? And when we ask ourselves that question, we have to then acknowledge the systemic issues at play, like poverty, classism, just generalized capitalism, that cause folks to be in the position that they have to be like, the best option is for me to give my child away. And that's a problem. And we don't want to do that because, again, we don't want to be accountable to those systemic issues because we live in a society of comfort, or a society of privilege that most of us can be 1 or 2 steps removed and don't have to worry about any of those problems, any of those systemic issues.
It tends to be reframed, and this was something was said to me a lot when I was very young. Well, when I started being annoying and asking questions, it was that sort of your parents didn't want you; they just literally threw you away. And obviously, that sort of people do things for all sorts of different reasons, but I'm a firm believer that to make a decision like that, even if you do it half-heartedly and you do it quickly because that once you make a decision like that, you can't take it back.
Right.
The position that human being has to be in, or that family has to be in, must be so extreme that, sort of, you must be so desperate to even consider something like that, or you are coerced, deeply coerced into doing that. And we don't want to think, the West doesn't want to think about things like that,
No.
Sort of, because it's all love and light and so if we're doing a good thing, they don't want to actually look at the dark underbelly of the reasons why adoption comes about, whether that's transracial, national, or intercountry. Sort of many of the reasons, for people giving up that, for women giving up their children are deeply disturbing, and we still find it very difficult to kind of like take that on board and talk about it. And we need to, we need to be talking about that.
Well, again, it's like you holding up a mirror to yourself. And at the end of the day, the individual isn't necessarily responsible for all of the systemic issues, but you have to be able to recognize how you've played into this industry or the system and what your part is in it. Because when you can see that reflection, then you can start to ask those harder questions, because you're giving yourself the opportunity to recognize within yourself the role that you play. And then by being self-accountable, you can start to move a little bit more deeply into that conversation and have those tougher thoughts, those tougher conversations, that more difficult realization of, oh, there's something off here. There's something wrong here.
Yeah.
We're already 30 minutes into this conversation, and the whole point of the series is to address, what piece is missing from the BIPOC adoptee experience. And I think we've covered a ton. So I want to ask you specifically what you feel like out of maybe anything that we've talked about, or if there's something different or something else that you'd like to add to what you feel like is missing from the BIPOC adoptee conversation that we really need to be talking about.
For me, I think there are two things that are missing is the actual adoptee themselves, and being able to actually voice their experience, their lived experience, and not to be, gaslit or shouted down. The second is sort of society as a whole, actually having the conversations that we've been talking about honestly and openly. It's going to be difficult. Those types of conversations always are, but the willingness to actually have those is still not there, I don't think, either here or in the States. I don't think we're anywhere close to where I think we should be, given the time that we're in now and what we know. And I think that would help greatly to transform childcare. I think it would. But you can't change that unless there is the willingness from the people who have the clout, who actually hold those positions, whether that be governmental in terms of policy, or whether that's in the major sort of, adoption agencies. There needs to be transparency, honesty, and accountability. And I think we are so short on all of those things.
So how do those folks move closer to that? I feel like we've talked about it a little bit, and obviously it's child-centric. Like, we have to start centering the adoptees themselves in these conversations. How else do these agencies, just society in general, as a whole, move closer to getting to where we need to be?
I think it's, again, having open conversations, actually basically doing your homework and not relying on the half a dozen experts that you know, but going out and talking to people who actually have lived that, who are where those experiences are still raw. And also from the industry that I'm involved in is being prepared to kind of like stand up and call out the stereotypes and the tropes.
Sure.
Like Joyride, yeah, whoop. For me, look, it's half a dozen one and six of the other. It's great to see, sort of Asian faces on screen, as it should be. But beneath that is the old kind of like narratives being regurgitated and repackaged so it is palatable for the general market. And that belies, sort of the seriousness of the experience and the lives of those people. You can do something which is comedic and you can still push home and change that narrative. And unfortunately for me, that film doesn't do it, and it should have done, which I think is a shame, and it's a missed opportunity. It's playing into all of those things that I'm sure you, like me, the model minority, the adoptees got to be grateful, forever, sort of beholden to the people that adopted them, which is complete nonsense. We have to get away from all of those things. Like, sort of within, sort of culture, we have to start seeing the reality in fiction. That has to start representing and reflecting the reality of what it means to be a citizen who is transracially adopted, who has, sort of dual heritage or tri-heritage, and what that means, particularly in this day and age, particularly post, George Floyd and BLM. There are so many things, good things that came out of that. And we now need to see those being placed in to the policies, to the government, to society, and how we as communities actually relate to one another.
Right.
And that starts from actually honestly wanting to speak to people who have the expertise and the knowledge and not relying on academia.
100%. I appreciate you bringing up Joyride. We've had many conversations about that film on this show and just other spaces, particularly social media. And I agree that it was definitely a missed opportunity. And I also feel like the community itself is trying to latch onto it as an opportunity to really focus in on why it was a missed opportunity. And so you talked about, particularly from your specific industry, film and television, that creative specific industry, how do folks within that sphere, how do they go about making sure they are addressing this, particularly when they tell adoptee narratives? How do we ensure that folks that are creating these projects, that work in production, that are in the writers' rooms, that are in the director's chairs, how do we make sure that we are accurately and appropriately telling stories like this?
It's a long road. It's the same process that you do, that the Black community has had to do, that the British East Asian community is now doing, which is you have to stick your head above the parapet and you have to start calling out this nonsense. And it's unpopular, and then you go through the phase of you start finding that people are looking for consultants, cultural consultants, and then transracial adoptee consultants. And that, for the most part, until recently, is just a ticking a box exercise. They're not really interested in people saying, look, this is not right. This is not correct. It doesn't chime with the experiences that we are aware of. It takes a lot of effort, and also you end up having to do the work. And then it's a question of finding the funding to get unpopular narratives, because people don't know how to market these things, sort of what is it? Well, at the end of the day, it's a story. And if the story is good, then it doesn't matter whether you're brown, blue, black, purple with pink spots, you'll go and watch it. If it's done well, if the production values are good, and if the story is good, then people will go and see it. Crazy Rich Asians, sort of Farewell, Pointing Gaze, people will put bums on seats. But then again, it's, we have to target those that are in positions of power, that hold on to the money, who commission things, who produce things. And that can be tough,
Right.
And it's, sort of a lot of the time, there are sections within our own communities who just don't want to be reminded of the real stories.
Sure.
Because it's much easier to bury your head in the sand and just think everything's fine. Well, we've just gone through a pandemic, and there are many people in the UK, and I'm sure it's possibly the same in the States, from BC communities who thought that they were okay, and they were the first people thrown under the bus during the pandemic.
Right.
And it's part of that thing for me, have we gotten to this stage as, sort of citizens, that we lack so little knowledge of ourselves, and we are so de-invested in what we are, that we would throw ourselves under, that we want to be something that we are not, that we want to be honorary white. We're not.
Right.
We need to learn to be proud of what we are, of where we come from, of who we are, and how we contribute to the societies that we are in, no less than anybody else. And we have to be able to stand up for that. We have to buck the trend of an older generation, which I totally understand, saying, keep your heads down, don't put attention to yourself, just get on with it. We've gone past that stage now. We are who we are. We are here because of our ancestors, and that will always be the case, and that's something that we will always be proud of, or should be proud of. But we exist in our own right, and we are who we are, and we need to not be afraid of standing up and shouting out and calling nonsense out when it happens, whether that's internal, sort of prejudice, or external prejudice. we're asking for allies, so we have to do the same. We have to be
Right.
as equally, inspective and sort of critical of ourselves internally as we are of those external.
You are preaching to the choir right there, because that's what we need to hear. And you're absolutely 100% right. At the end of the day, we've not had the models to show us what it looks like to stand up for ourselves, particularly within the adoptee community. Like,
So,
again, a lot of us operate in like academic or scholarship spaces. It's a little bit more inaccessible. And we're slowly finding ourselves into these more public, visible facing areas, particularly with social media, where people are now utilizing their voice and standing up and shouting against. And at the end of the day, it is still difficult to push back, because those people who sit in privilege and power, who have all of the money, are the ones who have the opportunity, will give you the opportunity to go. And they're like, hey,
yeah,
you need to tone it back. You need to scale back
correct.
on the rhetoric that you're sharing in order for you to come and have this opportunity. And some people are because of their circumstance or whatever their lived experience is, are going to be willing to jump ship that way and go,
Yeah.
because this is how I make it. This is how I get to that next level. And unfortunately, we have to, maybe not unfortunately, but we have to also have the folks who are willing to buck that and say, I
Yeah.
don't want your money. I don't need your position. I need you to understand us as a community, understand this lived experience, and start taking it seriously and validate that. And I think it's really, really difficult.
It's very difficult to push against that, and particularly
Yeah,
in the industry that I work in, I get why there is probably, when it comes to sort of the blue tick strata, they don't want to speak out because they have gotten to that place of renown and privilege, because they have taken parts that I suspect they probably weren't happy to do in the past, but that's
sure.
given them the trajectory. And I'm not, sort of, don't get me wrong, you can only make that decision for yourself. But there's a point
Right.
at which I think you have to decide which side of the fence you are going to sort of put your mark on. And I'm sort of gotten to the stage where I'm old enough now. Hey, look, what else can happen to me? I don't fear speaking out, but the backlash that can come, particularly with social media, can be pretty extreme. And for younger people, that sort of, I get it. That can be quite frightening, But the more people that are willing to actually maybe not shout, but maybe just put a hand up, then that leads to a fist, then that leads to, a full blown on, sort of network crazy shouting out the window and encouraging everybody else to do that. Then the more we will highlight the things that need to be challenged and changed. And the more people will see that they are not alone, and there are other people that are willing to do that understand that it's never going to be a perfect world, but we
Right.
can do what we can do to try and change that. And we can be part of
100%.
the solution, not part of the problem,
100%. I find the thing with Joyride so interesting, because I had some friends here who operate in the film and television industry as adoptees, who, one person in particular, she's like, I'm going to share. And she put on every one of her posts, please don't blacklist me, because she had an
Yeah.
experience with this film that was completely different than what other people were talking about, who were she was not praising it as the portrayal of an adoptee experience. And I feel like that's so hard for somebody to stand up and be like, I work here. This is what I want to do with my life. And I have to beg the people in power to not shut me down and shut me out and shun me and blacklist me, just so I can voice my opinion on what I feel like was done incorrectly with this film. And I think that's bravery on another scale. I
Yeah,
think that we don't recognize too
absolutely.
often enough.
And I think that, sort of, particularly in the UK, there was such a lack of representation of British East and Southeast Asians that any time a face like this appears, good, bad, or ill, it's like, yay, brilliant.
Right.
And it's really difficult to actually say, well, yes, but however, content-wise, what does that mean? What,
Right.
the character that you see on your TV screen or on your cinema screen, what is that actually saying to us as human beings, as part of the wider society? And, what is it showing us culturally? 9 times out of 10, we are still the illegal immigrants, the people that are heavily accented. Or if we're not, we are the sidekick to the white protagonist. The narrative is not our own. We don't have our own thought processes. We don't have our own storyline. We don't have our own concerns. Everything is an adjunct to the white hero, if you like. And you say things like that, and then suddenly you are, you're being disrespectful to the actors that were in it. And it's like, well, I didn't say that. What I'm saying is, why can't we look deeper at the content? Who wrote the damn script? Who produced it? We've got a plethora, we've got a growing catalogue of really interesting documentaries, particularly about East Asian adoptees, finding siblings, wanting to find out where they'd come from, and looking at their horrific, the subterfuge, if you like, on getting those children adopted. But we lack that in the fictional space, the dramatic space.
Yes.
And when you do get stuff like that, like over here, there was a program called One Child. And on the premise of it's brilliant. But watching the program, it's very much from a Western lens, from a white lens of, yes, this child was saved, etc., went to a good life. And why the hell would you want to go and look for your your birth mother?
Yeah.
And that just happens time and time again, even when you get fictionalized, sort of adoptees, sort of in the big franchise, Loki. I mean, typical, the evil kind of nutty adopted brother.
Right.
And it's just, sort of, you're either kind of like evil and kind of like mentally ill, or you're saved, you have to be saved, and things have to be done for you in order for you to progress, sort of, or, sort of like Line, the adaptation of that sort of, sort of story was put very much, sort of the mother as the victim, and poor thing, she'd adopted these 2 children that were really, really problematic. And it's like, hang on a minute, it should be about the children, not about the white woman who's kind of like, for whatever reason is having a bad day. It should be about the children. And the fact that, they should never have been adopted he should never have been adopted in the first place.
Exactly.
Sort of, so it kind of that maddens me. But then that's a narrative which is palatable. And it makes people feel good, doesn't it?
100%. And the palatability, I think, is such an important thing to name, because I think that's I think a lot of us are realizing that all of the work, or most of the work that's out there about the particular lived experiences of adoptees, comes from academia and is less palatable or digestible for folks in the wider audience, which is why a fictional narrative is so important for us to be able to really internalize these narratives for other people, for people to really understand it. Because for whatever reason, they can turn their brains off to a documentary and be like, well, that's just, that's the outlier. That's something that's just so far afield. Like, they only made this because it happened to this one person or these 5 people, whatever it is. They can justify it in their minds. With fictional narratives, for whatever reason, it makes something click with people. And they're like, oh, okay, there's something wrong here.
And they're more likely, which is something that's been said of my work, and I sort of did a wee social media post about this, is that initially I thought, having gotten critiques back from several literary people who all actually were male and white, middle class, sort of, the characters are really dislikable. And I was thinking, oh God, what have I done? And rereading what I've written, I came to the conclusion, it's not that they're dislikable, it's they portray a personality, a side that they don't want to hear.
Right.
That adoptees are not supposed to be outspoken. They're not supposed to have these feelings. They're not supposed to be, they're not supposed to question the wonderful life that they've been given. And that, mothers are not always the saints that we want them to be.
Right.
It's a difficult position to be a mother. Particularly in the West, you put them up on a pedestal, and as soon as, women say, oh, I don't want to have children, then they're demonized. You can't say that because you should be maternal. That's your whole raison d'etre, isn't it? And that, not all mothers who adopt are the saints that we would like to think, unfortunately, because we're dealing with human beings. There are a lot of adoptive mothers who have narcissistic personalities, and it's something that we have to grapple with, something that we have to talk about. And I think those aspects which appear in my work, they are then classified as, it's not that it's bad writing, it's characters that people wouldn't like, they don't want to see that on stage, or that you're a very angry writer. And I'm thinking, that I'm not actually. I've not written it in capital letters. It's because it makes you feel uncomfortable.
Right.
That's what it does. It makes you feel uncomfortable because you've been told that all adoptees are subservient. They're always grateful. They're forever beholden. They will always do what the parents want them to do, even when they're adults.
Right.
Which is not the case.
100%.
We are not blank sheets of paper, that you can write upon. No matter how young you are when you're adopted, you are not that. No child, whatever, wherever they come from, is a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah,
and I think
it's like we have lives that happen prior to our adoptions. Even if you were adopted 3 months, you still have 3 months of history. And not only that, you have an entire history biologically that extends backwards that you will now have no access to, because that gets wiped away. And at the end of the day, it's still there. But for whatever reason, for many reasons, we are not allowed to have that because they want us to be the blank slate, because we are now imprinted upon as in westernized ways, as American or as British or wherever you end up.
Whatever. Yeah. And they want us to remain perpetually children.
Yes.
And they treat us perpetually like children. So you are told you don't know what you're talking about, or you're mentally ill for actually basically saying something that is anti-adoption.
Well, and again, in general society, they know folks who are like the common response is, well, my brother's uncle's nephew is adopted and they're just fine. They don't have any of these problems that you're talking about. And it's like, well, one, why are you talking for them? And two, I would love to talk to that person just to hear about their experience, because it might be wildly different than what you think it is and what you're telling me that it is.
I mean, I think, it's that thing that we were talking about earlier, that there is no one story that fits every single transracial adoptee or adopted person. We are all unique, and our experiences are framed by so many things. But I think there is a common denominator for most adoptive people that I've come across, and that is the thing that is missing. And it is maybe a thing that you can never put a finger on for transracial adoptees. It is the lack of that continuance or understanding of your heritage and your culture, that gap in your sort of, DNA of identity. For other adoptees, it is always possibly most common the sense of not belonging or being different, even if they look the same. It's that
100%.
That discomfort, isn't it? Knowing inside that there is something that is slightly off.
Yeah. I think you've just nailed the missing piece of this entire conversation forever. Is that I like the way you described it, the lack of continuance or understanding of your history, your culture, your lineage. Like 100%. We all, because that is the one thing that really we all share. Because, like you said, no one story can encapsulate everybody's experience. No. Even if you're adopted to the same family, you are like my younger sister, also adopted from Korea, not biologically related to me. We grew up in the same household, a year and a half apart, like wildly different experiences, wildly
Yeah.
different relationships with
Oh.
adoption and our coming to consciousness moments. And people want to generalize that because they don't want to talk about what we lost in the process. And if we start to address
Yeah.
that, we can gain that greater understanding, not only as adoptees ourselves, but for general society, for people outside of this community to really understand what it is. And like that piece right there is something that I share with my friends who are not adopted. And the first thing they say is, oh yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. And it's because people get like, oh, I can look back at my history. I can access this if I want to, and my parents can tell me. Like, they don't just have the story of, well, you were given away because they couldn't take care of you, or you were just thrown on the side of the street, or you're left at the fire station, or whatever it is. Like, we don't have that, and they have that. And when they realize, oh, other people don't have that, I didn't realize, it crystallizes for them, oh, there's something off here.
We are the Frankensteins, aren't we? We are cultural Frankensteins. We operate in that no man's land between two very distinct cultures. And, sort of, I use that phrase because I think it's apt in terms of the monster is all of the things that you shouldn't do, that you may want to do, but you shouldn't do. And I think transracial adoption is very much a Frankenstein. It's a great ideal, but the actual practicalities of doing it, the actual knitting together of things that don't go together is possibly just because you can do it, maybe you shouldn't, and we are left in that no man's land between two identities. And it takes it took me over half a century to come to terms with that. And I am now incredibly comfortable in who I am. And more importantly, I think it is who I am not.
Sure.
And that makes other people really uncomfortable because, sort of they don't like that.
They don't.
But that's their problem, not mine. So,
exactly. Exactly. Not our problem. It's their problem. I can see why
Absolutely.
you work in the area that you work in, because you paint these really vivid pictures. You use incredible metaphors. And I'm out here just like, okay, I need to incorporate a lot of this language into the way I talk about adoption. I think this is beautiful. And Lucy, I really appreciate, we're already in an hour here. It feels like we've only been talking for 20 minutes. We've covered so many things. And you've given us such an education, not only myself, but the audience listening right now, about a ton of different things. And, we actually even did get down to this common denominator, that key missing piece for adoptees themselves. And I think it's really important for us to be able to learn from folks like you who have a unique, not only lived experience, but a unique perspective on the experience of what it means to be adopted, and the way that you're able to talk and frame these things, these concepts, these ideas of how we have that conversation and what we need to do to move forward is so, so important. And again, when we do this is labor for us to educate other people, to even have this conversation, to go through, to share this knowledge so people can learn. Is there anyone right now that you're learning from? Anybody that's inspiring you at the moment when it comes to shifting, reframing, thinking differently, developing new perspectives on this conversation or others?
I've just finished reading Michael Holding's book, Why We Kneel, How We Rise. And I think it's something that pertains not just to people of Black, Afro-Caribbean descent, but to anybody who I think has been marginalized. And I think what is lacking both particularly in the UK, in the sort of transracial adoptee community and also in the British East Asian community, is that ability to kind of go beyond just the immediacy of our own sort of particular challenges, but also looking at our challenges in tandem with the challenges of other people from minorities and disenfranchised groups within society, and learning lessons from that, and knowing that collaboration and allyship doesn't mean that you lose that sense of who you are and that uniqueness, but that actually being able to join hands, the greater the group, the more the power you have, sort of,
100%.
and actually taking, a leaf out of, sort of the civil rights movement, and looking at the variety of people that were central to that movement, not just people of Black heritage, but people of Asian heritage as well. And it's amazing that, particularly over here in the UK, we are not sort of immediately privy to that history, and we should. And I think that's a leaf out of your country's book. This is where we should be heading for. This is our power. This is our strength. Diversity is our strength. That is, and from that comes unity. I think I truly hope and believe.
I absolutely love that. Could not agree more. We, at the end of the day, as an adoptee community, now we have to recognize ourselves and our own power. And then when we realize that, find our community, like you said, we have to be able to see and recognize that we are just part of a larger fabric of community and people, that at the end of the day, we all need to move together in solidarity, in tandem, to be able to reach what we want to reach, which at the end of the day is freedom. True freedom and liberation for each of us. And that's a big, lofty goal that America likes to hoist up on a flag and say, oh, we were already here, when at the end of the day, you can look out on the street and see that that's just not true.
I mean, I think it was Obama who said building roads to nowhere and monuments of nothingness. And we can actually flip. If we join hands, we can actually be the people that build roads to somewhere and build monuments that mean something to everybody. And I think that's, an absolute goal and ideal. And I think it will come from, hopefully, the generations that are coming through now.
I think so too. I'm really inspired by a lot of young people right now who I actually just met with an adoptee yesterday who is 20 and is having a lot of these conversations already. And I'm like, that's great, because I know too many people who are like us or older who come to these realizations, these come to consciousness moments much later in their lives.
Yeah.
And it's like, we are not only building for ourselves, we're building on the foundations of other adoptees who have come before us. So that way the younger adoptees who come after us can continue to build vertically instead of laterally. So we can keep moving forward.
It's about holding doors open, isn't it? And allowing people to walk through without and not letting them slam closed.
Exactly.
And we have to do that and ensure that continues.
Exactly. Lucy, you have been an absolutely incredible guest. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us here today. I can't wait to continue to have conversations with you, because I feel like I learned a lot from you, and I would love to learn more about your specific story and learn more about how you got into filmmaking and how all of that is tied into all of this, even though we've talked about a little bit of that here. But as we come to a close on this particular conversation, last question for you. How does our audience here support you specifically?
Well, you can follow me on social media. I'm not on X, formerly known as Twitter. I am on Threads, which is just Lucy Sheen, and I'm also on Insta. So please drop by and say hi. And if I've got time, if I'm free, I will obviously say hi and follow you back. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, we will have all of your socials, every way that we can connect with you, down here in the show notes. We'll also have Michael's book, Why We Kneel, How We Rise, linked down here in the show notes as well for anybody who wants to pick that up. Again, thank you so much for coming on, for giving me the privilege and honor of your time, your story, your expertise, your knowledge over this last hour. Like I said before we hopped on air, these conversations are usually 30 to 40, but they've been going a little bit longer for the series. This is 100% indicative of that, because there's so much to this conversation that we have to be talking about and that we should be. And so I really appreciate you giving us everything that you've given us in this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. For everyone else, again, find the links to everything that we've talked about here in the show notes. If you want to connect with us directly, you can do so on Instagram at Conversation Podpiece. If you do feel inclined to leave a rating or review on whatever you're listening or watching this on, we would greatly appreciate that. And if you are interested in supporting the show in the future in any way, feel free to hop in our DMs or visit our website, conversationpeacepod.com. Until next time, I'm Patrick Armstrong, and this has been Conversation Piece. Thanks, Lucy.